Okay, and welcome back to our final part of this morning's sessions. It's been amazing so far, and I'm sure our last few panelists will live up to that as well. So, to talk about diverse schools, we have the following guests. I'd like to introduce Andrew Moffat first, who I have to say a very special thank you to. He stepped in last minute for our speaker, Anjum, who was actually with us and not feeling very well. But then welcome and get well soon, Anjum. But thank you, Andrew, for stepping in to do that. Andrew is a personal development lead for a MAT. And with Andrew today, we have Ebanie Xavier-Cope, who is a Year 6 teacher and a Key Stage 2 lead. Welcome, Ebanie. We have Jared Cawley, who is an international teacher. Welcome, Jared. And we have Sajid Gulzar, who is a CEO and is the recipient of an OBE. And our partner speaker today is from Leeds Beckett University's Centre for Race, Ethnicity and Decolonisation. We have Professor Vini. So without further ado, we're going to go straight in. Andrew, we have you starting off talking about no outsiders. Please do go ahead.
Okay, hello everyone. And first of all, get well soon, Anjum. So I'm going to start by reading a piece of work from a child in my school this week. Actually, this is done by taught by an NQT. It wasn't a no outsiders lesson, but it shows how no outsiders is a thread throughout the school and is brought in. So it's a lesson about segregation, and it's a Year 5 class. And the child wrote what I think about segregation. She wrote, it could have been a he actually, I'm not sure. The child wrote, "We believe that segregation is bad because people decided to make schools like that. They don't understand about diversity. It's okay to be different. I think being different is more than okay because if everyone was the same, it would be very boring. Everyone did the same thing at the same time. If someone is gay, bisexual, or lesbian, it's okay because you're not them, and their opinion it's your opinion, not theirs. If you have a disability and someone says something bad, just ignore them." And it says schools should be segregation in schools should be banned because it's okay to be black, white, or mixed race, gay, bisexual, lesbian, male, female. At our school, we believe that there are no outsiders. Now, what I like about that in particular, first of all, I like it as an NQT taught that lesson. She literally skipped up to me on Wednesday to say, "Look at what this child wrote." I was so proud of her. You know, 6 weeks teaching and a class of coming out with things like that. But also what I like about that is that it mentions lots of protected characteristics. It mentions race, it mentions disability, sexuality, and that's how we need to be teaching this in our schools. You know, not single issue work, but talking about the quality and context of everyone being equal and everyone being welcome in our schools. So very, very quickly, I'm going to show you my current favourite book. I taught this in Year 6 this week. It's called, I'm going to get here, it's called A Day in the Life of Marlon Bundo. Actually written by a rabbit. It's written by Mike Pence's rabbit, actually. Just very, very quickly, I'll tell you the story. It's about Marlon, who lives in the VP's house. And he meets Wesley, another rabbit. And I'm trying to get you so you can all see it. There we go. And they fall in love. It's another boy rabbit, and they fall in love. They decide to get married, and all animals are very, very happy about that, and they all cheer. But then the stink bug comes along, and he says, "You can't get married." And it says, "Let me tell you about the stink bug. The stink bug is in charge. He's important. The animals can't work out why he's in charge or how he's important, but he was important, and he makes the rules. It means that everyone listens to him, even though he was, and this is true, very stinky." Now the rabbits say that we want to get married, and the stink bug says, "Too bad. I am the stinkiest and I'm important. I am in charge. Boy bunnies marry girl bunnies. Girl bunnies marry boy bunnies. That is the way it has always been. You are different, and different is bad." So what do the animals do? Well, they talk about how they're different, and like the badger says, for example, "I eat my sandwiches crust first," and then they decide they should have a vote. And they should vote stink bug out. So they vote, you vote for a stink bug, or you can vote not stink bug. And stink bug gets voted out. And you are not in charge, they say. And so boy bunnies can marry boy bunnies if they want. I'm going to read you a quick piece of work from a Year 6 child on that, about democracy. How does democracy work was the inquiry question. And this child wrote, "Your reign is nearly over, Stinkbug. Rules are changing, and so is the animal that is in charge. We will vote. The two options are stinkbug or no stinkbug. Vote for no stinkbug if you think difference is unique. The same gender should be able to marry in peace. Democracy is the solution. And that's written from the badger who eats the crust first on his sandwiches. So again, this is what we need to be teaching our children in school: democracy, being involved. And let's not forget that we are under attack, aren't we? As diversity teachers, we are under attack at the moment. There's a dreadful letter going around schools at the moment from supporters of Baroness Nicholson of Winterbourne, who's trying to get schools to withdraw RSE and stop teaching about trans. There were awful protests in Birmingham last year about teaching LGBT equality in schools. And then what happened in Paris yesterday? Look what happened in Paris yesterday. A teacher was beheaded because of teaching about freedom of speech. So we've got to be, clear about why we're teaching this, supporting it, and have a very clear narrative moving forward.
Thank you, Andrew. It's wonderful to see how you engage with books, and Hannah's mentioned this as well, and how books can be such powerful teaching tools to create those diverse thinkers. And you're right, we do need to think very clearly about how diversity is represented and the teacher's role in this in a very difficult political climate. So thank you for sharing that. I'm going to move on to Ebanie, who is going to talk to us about dealing with racism. Ebanie, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. I wanted to talk to you about an experience that I encountered. So
I think we may have temporarily lost Ebanie. Just going to give it a second. We may switch around the order just slightly until we get that technical issue fixed. So Jared, earlier than usual, but earlier than expected, but can you step in for us? Because you were going to talk to us about diverse schools, in particular about LGBTQ+.
Yes, of course. Thank you for having me. Lovely to be here. And today what I want to talk about is the importance of feeling safe in your school as a teacher through an LGBTQ+ lens. So when I talk about feeling safe, what I mean is that in your working environment, that you feel secure, you work in a trustworthy environment, you have this harmony between yourself and your identity, and that you're celebrated and not just tolerated, and that you have an opportunity to thrive personally and professionally. And when I talk about, well, what is it like to be unsafe at school? As a teacher, I feel like if it's unsafe, then you cannot be your authentic self. You're working in an environment that's full of uncertainty, anxiety, and there's a genuine fear of harassment and discrimination. And ultimately, when you work or you feel like you work in an unsafe environment, then your well-being will suffer. And ultimately, an unwell teacher is not productive, and nor is it safe. And as teachers, when we feel safe in our working environment, then we can provide the best education for our students. I just want to look at, from a global perspective, on LGBTQ+. There are 72 jurisdictions that criminalize consensual same-sex relationships, and there are 8 countries that have the death penalty for being a homosexual. And in more than half the world's workplace, LGBT people are not protected. And sadly, like Andrew, murders of transgender people, and especially people of color, transgender people, their murder rates are on the rise. So it's really essential that we feel safe as teachers and as students in our schools. And I just want to sort of talk about my experience as a gay teacher. And for the first 2 years of my career, when I was working in the UK, my NQT year and my second year, I really, I chose to hide my sexuality. And I saw my professional life and my personal life as two very separate entities. And I really battled with this. And it sort of threw me into a pit of anxiety and shame. And what I soon learned was that you have to bring your 100% to school and to your work in order to be effective. So if, for example, we look at the conversations in the staff room or in the corridors, how often have you heard, "How was your weekend? How's your husband's job going? How's your girlfriend's called? Congratulations on the engagement. Sir, do you have a girlfriend? And when I was trying to have these separate professional life and personal life, I soon realized that sexuality in the workplace is inescapable. So I decided to come out. I came out to myself, my friends and family, and then eventually professionally. And once I did that, I was being my authentic self. And as teachers, we want to be a good role model to our students and to our colleagues. And by choosing to be closeted and by choosing to not come out, what I was doing is I was perpetuating this image, this role model of shame. And I was saying to my colleagues and saying to the students that being gay is something to hide and being gay is something to be ashamed of. And I suppose my sort of takeaway today is, what can schools do to ensure that it's a safe place for LGBT staff and LGBT students? And we're all in it together. We're all stakeholders here. It's not just the responsibility of a leadership team. So we can talk about policy and procedures, but I'm talking about just little quick fixes that we could do. So for example, if you're a teacher coming to that school for an interview and you identify as LGBT+, or you're a same-sex family, or a student who's questioning their sexuality, or who identifies as LGBTQ+, how do you know that this school is a safe place? And what I suggest is maybe teachers can wear LGBT lanyards, for example, just to show equality and support, fly the pride flag inside or outside your school, and have displays around your school that celebrate the diverse society in which we live. Also, two more things: inclusive language. The power of language is very, very important. It can exclude and include. Say good morning, everyone. Don't just say good morning, ladies and gentlemen, because you haven't included everybody. Challenge staff and challenge students who use language that diminish sensitivity, like man up, boys don't cry. And lastly, educate yourself. Ask your LGBT staff. Ask their voices, research LGBT voices, and there is a plethora of organizations that can support you in this. So yeah, that's it. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jared. That was really practical. I think lots of us, we're time poor in so many ways in schools, and those quick tips can really, really help. Thank you for stepping in as well. And we do have Ebanie back. So I'm going to go straight to you, Ebanie, to let you start your talk on dealing with racism, if that's okay.
So my name's Ebanie. I have been teaching since September 2011. I initially qualified as a music teacher before moving to teaching primary full-time in September 2016. I was born and raised in South London, but I've spent most of my teaching career in Kent schools. I'm going to talk to you today about racism in education, but from my perspective. I'm yet to be able to talk about this without becoming quite emotional. So I've got tissues. You're just going to have to bear with me, I'm afraid. So, at a school I was in, I was put down to cover Year 11 ICT. And as I walked into the classroom, the children were getting on with their work, as you would expect, because they're Year 11. As the lesson progressed, I started hearing monkey noises, but I dismissed it. And then I heard it a few more times throughout the lesson, and I was like, no, I can't be hearing that. Surely, no. So at the end of the lesson, I went back to my classroom. Later on that day, I had my tutor group, and it's vertical tutoring. So I had some Year 7s all the way up to Year 11s. And one of my Year 11 girls was in that ICT class, and we were just talking about the lesson. And I said, I thought I heard monkey noises in the lesson today. And she went, yeah, they do that. They do that to the black maths teacher all the time. And I was like, right, okay. Made me furious. So I emailed the necessary staff. But nothing happened. No one did anything about it. I didn't hear anything back. But I wasn't going to give up. And I knew that I had to fight in order for something to get done. Otherwise, they'll just brush it all underneath the rug. So a few days later, I was back with the girl in my tutor group. She was talking to me about the boys from the ICT class. And she said, they were talking about you today and they kept calling you her. And I said, actually, her name's Miss Cope. well, my surname is Xavier-Cope, but the children at that school, they couldn't say Xavier. So I was like, okay, Miss Cope. And the boys' response was more like Miss Coon. And I couldn't hide the feeling that I felt. So I walked out of my tutor group. I literally just left the children and I walked out, and around the corner was the head of performing arts. And I asked her to cover my tutor group. And I went to the office and I demanded to speak to a member of SLT. And the office manager, she sent me to the assistant head. When I went to the assistant head office and I broke down and I spoke to her, she said, "What are you talking about? I don't know anything about this." So I said, well, I've been in contact with the school, and I named the staff. And I said, clearly the school don't want to do something about it. If you don't want to do something about it, that's fine. Let me know and I will make a phone call and I will get it dealt with my way. And they went, oh, no, we can't have that. We can't have that. And that is when things started to happen. I wasn't invited to any meetings. I wasn't told of anything that was happening. They made it like I was the one that was making a big deal out of it. I'd never received an apology. I didn't know anything that was happening. I did know that the boys got excluded. Their sixth form place was taken away from them. So then they had to go to a sixth form elsewhere. But the experience, as horrific as it was for me at the time, it really pushed me to do something positive with it. So I did my first ever Black History Month project. And it was in that same school I did my first one. They gave me a budget so I could hire in Caribbean caterers. I did an event after school. It was successful. I had people coming in to support me. I had people coming to tell me thank you. The head teacher came in, she had a look, she thought it was great. So there were over 1,000 children at this school, but about 13 of them were Black or mixed race. And I had those children do whole school assemblies talking about their heritage, just to kind of educate their peers and the people around them. Since that, I have led Black History Month projects in every single school I've been in. I make it my duty to lead it. The incident pushed me to educate others on Black people and on our history. And to me, that's my bit of dealing with racism in education. But as I was going through all of this, I realised that I couldn't find any support from like outside agencies. Yes, I could call my union, which we should all do, because that's why they're there. They're there to support us. So I created the Black Kent Teachers Alliance, which is a support network for Black teachers in Kent. And it doesn't just deal with racism, but it just deals with any sort of support that we may need, because sometimes we may need a boost from each other. Sometimes you may be in a school where you're the only Black teacher in that school, and you may need support from other Black teachers because you can't get it in your place of work. So that's what it's about. But I was looking this morning at the statistics, and it said that there are 96.5% of head teachers in Britain are white, and 1% of head teachers in Britain are Black, and 93.9% are white deputy heads, and 1.6% are Black deputy heads. So the big question is, yes, I'm talking about racism in education and my experience, but what can be done to combat it in schools? And I think it goes back to that same question where you cannot be who you cannot see. So I think children need to see more diversity at the top, because then I think that will trickle down, and then that will help stop what happens to me happening to other people. And that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ebanie. Honestly, to hear that story just reminds me, all of us, how important it is to remember that this isn't a historical issue, that this is still an issue in schools today. And we have all been profoundly affected by what you've told us. It's horrific. But how amazing and inspiring that you've gone on to do something so positive, and that, people can seek your experience and know that it does get better. And we can have some agency when something bad like that happens. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, so next on our list, we have Sajid Gulzar. Sajid, you are here to talk about talent management in schools. So over to you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. So it's a really, really interesting topic, this, in terms of diverse ed. And a few years ago, myself and my senior team kind of sat down and did a bit of soul searching, because we hadn't really thought about diversity in terms of talent management or opportunities. And when we reflected on that, we realized that it was something that we in our organization had taken for granted. And when we started looking at our approach, our systems, our processes, what we realized was that actually, you know, we've got this vision that we want all of our children to receive a world-class education. And what we've always tried to do is to ensure that if you want this world-class education, you need to have world-class staff. And in order to have world-class staff, you need to have a culture that really ensures that there's a set of values that are being promoted, that are being lived by. And part of that culture is about valuing everybody. Part of that culture is about people, regardless of background, being able to see themselves as being successful in that organization. Part of that culture is cultural literacy of the staff, of the leadership in particular, of awareness of the lives of the children, of the staff. And as colleagues here have already said, it's about people being able to be their authentic selves. And it was a really positive experience for us, because actually we realized that was us. That although at one level we'd taken it for granted, on another level we were quite clearly, and still are quite clearly, an organization where we have that culture, where if you are going to manage your talent effectively, that's got to be about talent. That's got to be about opportunities for everybody, regardless of race, color, creed, etc., etc. And when I look around me, when I look at my senior team, when I look at those people who are really making their way in the organization, I can confidently say that we are that organization where there is an equality of opportunity. Actually, there's an equity of opportunity. And I'm reminded by a bit of recruitment we did a few years ago, probably about 6 years ago. We were recruiting for NQTs, and we had a huge amount of interest, really competitive field. And there was a young lady who came along, and it was a day-long process, and everything that she did, everybody that was involved from a recruitment point of view was absolutely blown away by her, absolutely blown away. And we received a phone call from her head. She was a student at a teaching practice, and we received a phone call from her head, unusual in itself, you know. And the phone call was the head warning me not to give this young lady a job, that she really wasn't cut out for teaching. She'd had a poor experience, and just, you know, the head didn't know why she'd been, how she'd got onto the course, etc. And we kind of went with our impression. You know, we were confident in our ability to identify potential and talent and so on and so forth, and we gave her the job. And 6 years later, she's thriving. She's been one of the best appointments that we've ever made. Now, interestingly, she wasn't white, and I'm assuming, it's an assumption, I didn't find out, but I've got a feeling that the community that within which she was working, the school that she was working, was predominantly white. And I'm not going to make any assumptions beyond that. We can all make our own assumptions. But that taught me something, taught me quite a profound lesson. And that was, we've really got to back ourselves in how we go about identifying talent and how we go about promoting talent. And the other thing about talent management is not just creating those opportunities for people to demonstrate what latent talent they have, but actually really clear, thought out, systematic development for those people. And that exists in our organization at every level, you know. So we are very open about the conversations that we have about the future, about people's aspirations, about how we're going to help them to get them, how we're going to help to get them there. And that's a very open and transparent conversation. And I think that's another really clear element of talent management, that communication, that transparency, talking about aspiration, talking about goals, and being very, very honest with people about their abilities and what they need to develop in order to get there. And it's also about not shutting people down and saying, I don't think you can. It's about having the conversation of, okay, well, how are we going to get you there? And then they've got a responsibility as much as the organization in terms of contributing to that. So I think talent management is a multifaceted, multi-layered thing, but it's very much about having a very clear vision and then having a robust and rich culture that enables people to reach their potential.
Thank you for sharing that, Sajid. It's incredibly important to talk about talent management. I'm always reminded of the story of hand sanitizers, automated hand sanitizer machines. On a very basic level, having that diversity of workforce can really make a real difference to the output that they're aiming for. No ethnic minority staff on a hand sanitizing machine meant that it was only tested out on white skin and wouldn't work on Asian skin or black skin, which I imagine put a dent in the profits. So thank you for sharing that. Last but not least, we have Professor Vini Lander from Leeds Beckett University. Vini, over to you, please.
Thanks, Benny. Thanks, Hannah, for inviting me, and good afternoon, everybody. We're now into afternoon. So I want to talk about race and racism in diverse schools. And of course, all schools are diverse in some kind of way or another, whether it's class, obviously gender, race, sexuality and disability. And what I want to do is talk about four things. I want to talk about how race presents itself in schools, the no problem here syndrome, which Ebanie has quite clearly illustrated for us in her very moving example, moving beyond the status quo, and then the responsibility of ethnically diverse schools. So regardless of the geographical context, how does race present itself in your school? Is there a prevailing attitude in some schools that we don't have a problem here because we don't have many Black, Asian or minority ethnic children, so therefore there's no problem here? I use that phrase, no problem here, borrowed from the book title of my late ex-colleague, Professor Chris Gain, formerly from the University of Chichester, and his subsequent books were entitled Still No Problem Here and We're All White, Thanks. So in the title of his three books, it's clear that at some point we have to make some inroads, particularly in terms of schools that are in predominantly white areas, in terms of looking at race. So schools can't assume that they're immune or don't have to consider race or racism in their school because they may be in a, leafy middle class white area or in perhaps in a rural location. I would argue that you don't need the presence of Black and brown students or staff for racism to prevail. And secondly, that schools who think there's no problem here are precisely the ones that need to do the most work on race and racism to better prepare their youngsters to live, to work in, and to engage with people regardless of their colour or other aspects of diversity. That no problem here syndrome may sound like a really sensible and logical position to take in some schools, and particularly if your school's in a predominantly white area, because even if you have the one or two students from global majority backgrounds, I got told once by a head teacher that when I pointed out that there were some students of colour in his school, he said, well, they're very well integrated. In other words, that there's a colour-blind approach to these youngsters. Do these youngsters feel safe in this school? That's the question I would ask. They may or may not experience overt racism, but they may have to endure the injuries inflicted by racial microaggressions. Of course, these are subtle everyday acts and utterances of suppressed caste, race, hate that cause hurt and trauma, and regular exposure to racial microaggressions can cause harm to mental health just as much as overt acts of hate. You know, it's a bit like snow falling very lightly and the snow builds up, and then you have an avalanche, you have a mental health crisis with that youngster, and over time they may well develop symptoms akin to PTSD. I recently heard of a young black girl in a predominantly white school whose peers ostracized her, who didn't talk to her, who were aggressive towards her. This young girl chose not to tell her parents. She did report it to teachers. Not a lot happened. She developed anorexia, her hair fell out, and it wasn't until she actually left the school that she actually told her parents exactly what had happened. So what I'd say in a similar way to what Ebanie was saying is your school safe for your students, especially for your students of colour? And racism is a health and safety issue. It is a safeguarding issue. And to maintain a no problem here position merely maintains the status quo, which benefits those from the hegemonic majority, and actually it leaves extant the complicity which perpetuates existing racial hierarchies, sustaining the symbolic violence inherent in our particular system. So how do we move beyond the status quo? Well, that requires courageous leadership. Post George Floyd and the BLM protests, race and racism has to matter to all educational leaders, because our youngsters are demanding that their teachers are conversant in and cognizant of all matters related to race. So why don't some teachers know how to engage in matters related to race, whether that's diversifying the curriculum, or whether that's dealing with youngsters' questions or misunderstandings, or indeed developing an anti-racist curriculum? We have to educate, or particularly our teachers, our trainee teachers, to be race cognizant. The teacher workforce is approximately 86% white. Teachers need to understand how and why race is important, particularly if you're from the white majority. They need to have the knowledge and understanding to navigate race and racism in diverse schools or non-diverse schools when it comes to race. So they need to know how their position as a white teacher holds inherent power and privilege, and this in turn determines really their position to race. We have to develop a racial literacy, a capacity to understand the way in which race and racism work in education. Our teachers have to have the language skills and the confidence to engage in these matters and not talk about there's no problem here. And I think racial literacy is actually everybody's responsibility, and it's an ongoing process of learning and unlearning, just as any element of equality is a constant journey. It's always a work in progress. And if you're interested in the work of the Centre for Race, Education and Decoloniality at Leeds Beckett University, and if you're particularly interested in the work that we do, please have a look at our website. But also, if you want to start your school on that anti-racist journey, we have put together an anti-racist school award. And if you're interested, please do email us on CRED, that's CRED, at leedsbeckett.ac.uk. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Professor Lander. That was really interesting. I like the idea of the process of learning and unlearning. So thank you for sharing your thoughts. I'm going to hand back over to Hannah now, who should be fielding some of our questions.
Yeah, thank you all. Powerful inputs. And Ebanie, well done for sharing that deeply traumatic experience without crying. Very proud of you. And thank you, because I think it shocked a lot of the viewers and listeners who perhaps are a little bit cushioned and don't realise that this still happens. So I think the golden thread for me from everything you've all said is about safety and how we can create safe spaces, how can we make our schools safe physically, emotionally, psychologically, for every single stakeholder in those school environments. So Ebanie, from a practical point of view, there's lots of interest in the project you put together as a result of your own experience. Could you speak a little bit more about what that Black History Month project looked like, and perhaps signpost how people can find out more?
Do you want me to talk about my initial Black History Month project, or the ones that I've been doing?
A little bit about
whichever one every year.
Whichever you want to spotlight, about how you got going, maybe.
Okay. So the initial one that I did at the school where I had the incident, I just went to my head teacher and I said, I said, it's Black History Month. How do we celebrate it? And she said, oh, we don't. And I said, okay, well, I think we should. And she said, okay, put together something for me and then come back and see me. So I put together, I had to do like a proposal about what I wanted to do, why I wanted to do it, if I'll need any money, how much money would I need from the budget, and all this kind of stuff. And I have a friend from church who is a caterer. So I spoke to her and I said, I need you to do some catering for my school, but I've got a budget, so makes rates. And so we sat down and she gave me how much it would cost, and I said okay, and I took it back to my head teacher with her price and everything that I wanted to do, and they let me do the go ahead. And because at the time I was a music teacher, I did so I was doing about different music, different genres of music, different singers, different artists, different musicians. We spoke about the different islands in the Caribbean and some of the food and some of the instruments that originate from there. And one of the girls at the school, we had some steel pans. We had a whole steel pan set. And she was like, my granddad made those. And I said, are you sure? And she said, yeah. So we found out that her granddad actually made the school steel band. So then she was one of the children who then did the assembly on her family history, being from Trinidad, and just letting everyone know about her family. And that's literally how it all came about.
I love that, because I think we quite often forget about our parents and carers and grandparents within our communities. And I know in a lot of US schools, they have days where they bring the kind of the community in. And I think that's an untapped resource perhaps for our schools sometimes. And coming to you, Jad, like I'm interested in the fact that I'm sorry, I had a delivery man knocking on my door and I missed some of your input. But as an international teacher, I know you're in the Netherlands. Has your experience been different teaching in international context to teaching in the UK?
In terms of curriculum, you mean?
In terms of
in
diversity,
terms of curriculum,
equity,
you mean?
inclusion,
Yeah.
and the kind of.
Yeah. Well, really, before I moved to the Netherlands, I entered this international school, and all of a sudden, I'm surrounded by 80 nationalities plus, families from all over the globe, and I'm teaching in my classroom, and children can speak 5-6 languages each, and it's just phenomenal. It's just this really rich, diverse environment that you're in. And can you hear me? Yeah. So yes, it's a really rich, diverse environment that you're teaching in, and it's really inspiring to be part of. But for me, as a teacher, and what I was talking about previously in my speech was, yes, it's all diverse and rich in terms of ethnic diversity and languages, but I wasn't really seeing an LGBT diversity across the school. And now we have a diversity committee, and it sort of offers people from all sort of protected characteristics to have a voice within the school, and that's evolving as the academic year continues. So yeah, I think that was it.
Thank you, Jared. You had a slight delay, but I got all your answers, so thank you very much. And swinging back to you, Andrew, I mean, if you want to just have an opportunity to spotlight the No Outsiders campaign, and I love the way you lead with books and thinking about the library being at the centre of how we diversify our schools and diversify our curriculum. Would you like to speak to that for me, please?
Yeah, actually, first of all, I want to ignore that question and come back to Ebanie with her what she talked about. I think it's really important, and full respect to you for continuing to teach after that experience, absolutely horrific experience. But I think it highlights the really important of allies, because why is it you that's got to deal with that? You know, and it reminds me of only 2 weeks ago, a good friend of mine moved to a secondary school, for a primary school, and he told me literally 2 weeks ago about that he's gay, and he was has been called gay in a corridor, children shouting down the corridor to him homophobic abuse. Not often, but it has happened. And the school's response to him was, feel free to challenge that. Which is completely unacceptable, isn't it? Because it's about the school challenging that, and the school being absolutely clear that language, alongside racist language, it is not acceptable. And here's what we're doing about it in our school. Our ethos is this. And I think allies are so important. We can't do this by ourselves. It shouldn't be the black teacher that sorts out racism and the gay teacher that sorts out LGBT stuff. It's going to be allies working together. So just very quickly back to your question, Hannah, about the library. Yeah, absolutely, it's so important. And representation, I think, is the key, isn't it? We've got to find books where pupils can see themselves. It's all about people seeing themselves in their books. I did a talk in a Sikh school at start of term in Coventry, and the deputy head there talked about how when she was growing up and reading and learning to read, she was put off by reading because in all the books that she looked at, this is in the 1970s, there were no Asian characters, and she couldn't see herself in those books. And she said that she feels like it's almost stunted her love of reading. Another teacher in that group talked about his family used to watch EastEnders, and he used to cheer whenever so often there was like a Sikh character who never had a line, but he'd walk past the back of the camera in the shop. And he said they used to cheer when this character used to walk across the screen in EastEnders, about seeing yourself in the lessons that you're teaching and the books that you're using. So it's all about finding books where children are represented.
Thank you, Andrew. Andrew, and coming to you, Sajid, one of the questions from the audience was about how can we improve the experience of our BAME students at school to then encourage them to return to be the teachers in the workforce. And I think that's a really interesting thing to think about there, that if they're having negative experiences at school, why do they want to become teachers? And any thoughts on that?
Yeah, the late, great Muhammad Ali said, if my mind can conceive it, my heart can believe it, and then I can achieve it. And that's what it's about. It's about our children. The majority of our children in 4 of our schools are from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds, predominantly South Asian families, 3rd, 4th generation immigrants. And somebody else, and I forget the reference for this, somebody said, in order to be great people, you need to know that you were great people. So you've got to see yourself in those positions, and that's where representation is really important. It is seeing yourself in a book. It is seeing yourself having achieved something. It is seeing scientists that look like you. It is knowing that your cultural heritage, your linguistic heritage, your religious heritage has many, many great scientists, for example, and artists and musicians, and seeing all of those people. And it is about that real representation and diversity of curriculum. And that's the formal side of things. And there is the hidden curriculum also, in terms of how all of these things are promoted. Malcolm X very famously, at the age of 10, was told that he wasn't intelligent enough to be, black people didn't become doctors. He's better off doing something with his hands. So it really is about our youngsters seeing themselves successful and seeing themselves at those very best universities, in those very best organizations, doing jobs that may seem out of reach in the traditional school because of the traditional curriculum. So I think representation is absolutely the key for that.
Thank you, Sajid. And final question to you, Vini. I think your reference to the book, No Problem Here, I think we all felt that back in June, where there was a sense of this is happening in the States and not in the UK, and we're okay in the UK, and we all know we're not okay in the UK. And you had a bit of a call to arms there about our leaders being courageous, and I think we'd also want them to be confident. Can you just give a message to the leaders who are listening today about how they can be more courageous in leading this work, please?
It's really about listening to the youngsters, because, as I said in my talk, our young people are demanding it, whether it's in universities or whether it's in our schools, and they want to know more. And the reason that I focused in on schools in predominantly white areas is that they think that they might be able to get away with it because there isn't the demand. But as I said, they really need to do more of that work, you know, than perhaps schools in ethnically diverse areas. So I'd say to the leaders and managers and governors here today is look at your school and ask those courageous questions. You know, where is race and how does it present itself in our school? How do we educate all youngsters to live in our society, to be able to engage with people from different racial backgrounds, from different sexual backgrounds, with different abilities? But also, I think the biggest issue for us as leaders of education is how do we prepare youngsters to work and live in a fairer society from what it was. And I've been in this game for about 30 odd years and we're still talking about the same issues. Really the time is now to begin to make a difference and really to make a push, and that has to come from our leaders, from our governors, from our head teachers. Be courageous, take the leap, look for allies and start that journey if you haven't already done so, but keep moving, because equality is always work in progress.
Thank you, everybody, on our fourth panel today. It's been an absolute delight to listen to you all. Thank you so much for contributing. You may now go disappear for a cup of tea. Benny and I will be back in 1 minute to do our reflections of the event today and get you all to do your commitment, your My Diverse Ed pledge. Thank you, everyone. See you shortly. So, Benny, where to start with our reflections on our second Diverse Ed virtual event? Do you want to kick off with what you're processing?
I think it's about kind of pulling out some of the threads that have come up. There's some really strong ideas. We started off with the idea of stories, and by the end of it, we were still talking about stories, whether they are individual or the journeys that we go on to make sure our children understand how to live in the world that we currently exist in. So for me, I guess one of my reflections is, you know, are school leaders aware of the story of their school and the individual stories within their schools? And that's not just about children, that's about their staff. You know, do they know if their staff have been subject to any kind of discrimination or you know, overt racism from parents, from children, from external bodies? And how do we find out as school leaders whether that's happening? It takes a brave, courageous leader to ask those questions. And that's something that's really struck me.
I would add to that by saying we are so data rich and data heavy in our schools for some data, but David Hermit's modelling of the data he's collating around this, I think, is really, really important. It really struck me about the fact that, like, what stories is the data telling us, and are we looking in the right places for that data, and how can we capture that data? Because as we both know, there's a massive focus on different types of data, and the human data quite often is missed. And I think, just thinking when we work together, the data we have about our students compared to the data we have about our staff, and how can we have more meaningful data about our staff in our schools as well.
And I think any good school leader would hopefully know something about the staff that they work with. But, you know, that auditing process of who you have in school and their experiences is something that's really powerful, because teachers are your best resource. They're your most expensive resource. And if you're not using them to the fullest degree with their stories as, you know, as teaching for our students, well, then it's a wasted opportunity. Why spend so much money on a resource that you only use 50% of? Your teaching and your subject knowledge is one thing, but your lived experience is something completely different. And that's quite often what we remember about our schooling, the people who taught us and their experiences. And we spend so much time with our children. We have incredible amounts of influence on them. And that's something that can be really, really positive.
So talking about resources, Benny, I'm going to put you on the spot. I want you to tell everyone about your book. When's it out and how can people get hold of it?
Okay, so this book, it is a small book. It's the A Teacher's Guide to Diversity in Schools, and it is published by Sage. It is available for pre-order now. I think it's actually on sale at a reduced price of around £9 the last time I checked. So please do go and have a look. So all of the ideas that we've talked about here are touched on in some way, shape or form in about 100 pages. So it's not time consuming. It covers classroom dynamics, it covers curriculum, it covers ethos and culture. So please do go and have a look and let me know what you think. It's one of the first books out there of its kind, so I'm hoping that there'll be lots of feedback so that there can be more books like this for us to use as a resource, and it's available from Amazon.
I've popped the book link into the chat, and one of our exciting developments is we can now announce that we have got a book deal. So Diverse Educators, the manifesto, will be published in January 2022. We see this book as a collective voice piece. We want all the protected characteristics to be represented. We are looking for chapter editors. There's going to be 100 contributors from our wide community. So please watch out for more details about how you can get involved. We are doing the editing. We are not necessarily doing the writing. We want to amplify your stories and your lived experience and the things that you are doing in your schools. Benny, do you want to add anything about our book?
Apart from the fact that I'm ridiculously excited about it, I don't think there's any other book out there like it. So, you know, we're looking at all of the protected characteristics, and yeah, getting that human data in some sort of book form so that there is a reference for how to deal with different situations. So there's a reference for the research, there's a reference for your networks, and yeah, really incredibly excited about reading the contributions and getting them into that space.
And it's only taken us 5 years, Benny. We've been mates for 5 years. We talked about doing a book together 5 years ago. So we're finally making it happen. Before we move to pledges, a question that's come up a few times in the comments just now. People working in schools who care about this work, but the people around them don't seemingly care. How can we engage the staff members who don't see EDI, DEI, whatever acronym you want to use, as work that we all need to do? Like, do you want to reflect on that first?
So it is incredibly difficult because, you know, inevitably some of the work will fall on those people with protected characteristics, because we care passionately about what's happening. But allyship is increasing. So more and more my network of contacts is saying, how can I help? And that's a sense of momentum that's built in the last few months, and something we really need to capitalize on. So don't feel like you have to do it all yourself. You might be at the forefront of it, but you do have a veritable army of people ready to support you, who believe in what you're saying, who believe in your ethos and your culture, who will step up and take part. And that sometimes means asking for help. And it sometimes means saying, actually, you know, I'm a little bit tired, and can you take over for me? There are times when, you know, certainly, you know, I'll be free to talk about this with Hannah. Times I've said to Hannah, you know, I'm talking about diversity, and it feels like I'm banging my head against a brick wall. And Hannah has stepped in, and she has been the ally that I've needed to be able to carry that momentum forward. So reaching out is incredibly important. Joining those networks, find the networks. There are so many organizations working. The Diverse Ed website will connect you. There's so many resources and links to organizations doing the work, so you don't have to feel like you're on your own.
And just two things to add to that. So I think one of the things that's really resonated with me today is the child's voice in this work. I think Lisa sharing those quotes, when Penny talks about Thomas, we both taught Thomas, it always makes me want to cry when I hear Thomas's voice and his quotation. For me, I think that there's some power in educators leveraging the voice of the children. So one of the assemblies that Benny and I had the privilege to be in was when our Year 7 Student Council did an assembly about equality, and actually at the start of the assembly said, no, it's not equality, it's equity, and getting 12-year-olds to teach a whole school about these values. So I think if you've got people who aren't listening and can't see it, how can you leverage the child's stories in your school and their voice, so then it can't be denied, would be my tip. So thinking about pledges, and sort of like, we're very, very keen that our events are not passive. It's great you've all been here today. How can we make an active commitment? Going back to what Lily said, let's not be bystanders, let's be upstanders. And how can we commit to moving forwards? I've just popped a link into the chat from the hashtag from the last event. So back in June, if you joined us, you did a hashtag MyDiverseEdPledge. I would like you to revisit the pledge you made back in June. We're 4 or 5 months forward now, and just see how far you've come with that. But if you weren't part of that event, I'd like you to think about what pledge can you make right now about what you'll do differently on Monday, after half term in January, so that we can collectively all keep the momentum going. Benny, any thoughts about what your pledge might be?
I think that the first pledge is very much about the curriculum. I'm working extensively on resources and networks that allow curriculum discussions to take place. So I'm really thinking about connecting a group of people who have expertise in subject areas. I've already started that process, but my pledge is very much about making that a platform that is useful to the wider teaching community, using subject expertise. And I'm an English teacher. I don't know about all subjects, so that will be something that I feel will be useful to our community.
Thank you, Benny. And my ongoing pledges around inclusive allyship. So just some things that I've done and committed to in the last few months. So if you are somebody who gets asked to speak at a lot of events, how can you share your mic with other people? I've now shared my mic 4 or 5 times with people from my network. Are you aware that your Black and brown counterparts have less followers than you on Twitter? There was a brilliant campaign, Share My Mic, back in June, where white women of notoriety in the States shared their platforms with their Black and brown sisters. So how can we even out the opportunity to be heard and to be seen at events? And I think the second part of that, Dr. Tim O'Brien tweeted this morning about being asked to speak at another event with an all-white male lineup. Yamina spoke about manels. We have manels, we have wannels, we have fannels. Okay, so these events that are either all male or all white female. Please can we vote with our feet, and please can we use our mouths? We need to challenge it when we're asked to speak at these events, but we also need to choose not to go to these events if there's not diverse representation speaking at these events. And my final piece around that is I am tired on behalf of my network that institutions and organisations and event companies are asking people of colour and people from diverse backgrounds to speak for free repeatedly. We need to value this work. We need to pay people and see them as professionals. Please stop asking people of colour to talk for free about being Black and brown. It's just not on. You would not ask anyone to come and speak about curriculum for free or research for free or teaching and learning for free. We need to value the D&I work, please, in education and make sure it's being remunerated. So please, can you take a moment now to get out your phones, get on social media. We want to make some noise. #MyDiverseEdPledge, and make that commitment and that call to action and amplify your commitment so we can amplify you, but also we can reach those people who perhaps didn't come to the event today. I'm going to see what's popping up and just read some of them out as they are shared. Just waiting for them to come through. They're not quite pulling through as yet. Okay, what we'll do is we will share them as a link to everybody who joined us this afternoon, because we are bang on time. I think the timekeeping today has been super slick. Thank you, Benny, for co-hosting, and thank you, Richard, for keeping us all organised with the timings behind the scenes. Any final words, Benny, before we disappear?
Just a huge thank you to everybody who has talked about the event on Twitter. It's really important to amplify the voices who have spoken today. So everybody who's been live tweeting, you really do help to get our points out there. And please do continue the conversation on Twitter after the event and share with your colleagues.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And our next event is in January the 16th. We're hoping it's going to be a live event. We're hoping to be back at Pioneer Education, Upton Court Grammar School in Slough. We will make that call in December, whether or not it'll be a virtual event or whether it'll be a face-to-face event. But we look forward to picking up the conversation and seeing you then. So thank you very much for joining us today. Have a great weekend.